But aside from that, I will generally be pretty hands off during this debate. I'll just let you guys hash this out. Again, unless I really need to step in, I won't do it. Okay, so you said, Duke, that for your opening statement, you want to play a clip?
Yeah, let me say a couple things before you bring up that clip, just to provide a little bit of context. So this was in regards to the last debate that I saw online. I think that's when I was in the chat. I think that's probably the whole reason why I got invited to this in the first place, because of some of the statements he made in that, which was about regarding women's rights and, rights being given or enforced by men, right? Things of the sort. And I found a couple things that were a little bit misleading with those statements that he made. And the girl he was debating didn't really provide a whole lot of pushback, which was interesting. But so he was talking about, because it seemed like there was a mixture of different things, right? And the undertone of what I sense he was getting at is part of the reason why men are the enforcers of rights, quote unquote, is because it seemed like it was more predicated on males' physicality, right? Our willingness to be able to be physical in actions and things like that, right? Over a woman. And there were even examples used if there was, if all men decide to go against all women type of thing like that, who would win, even with modern technology, all those different statements, which kind of led me to believe that he's coming from a purely physical perspective when he talks about this and rights enforcement. So we're gonna play that video now. And then I want to go ahead and ask a couple questions on what he means by that, and then we can get going.
Well, just to clarify, so this is an opening statement, so you just talk, and then you can ask the questions once he makes his opening statement.
Women can't make decisions about their own rights because they can't enforce their own rights. So since they have no enforcement mechanism other than men, all their rights come from men, so they can't actually be equal. There's always going to be a differential, and that's a necessary biological truth. It's not saying that women can't be equal in the eyes of men as far as, you can't murder them, abuse them, things like this within the commons that you would do with men. But there can't actually be egalitarianism. It's not even possible because women have no enforcement mechanism. So since there's no enforcement mechanism, there's just it's a laughably absurd idea.
Women have no enforcement mechanism.
Okay, that was the clip. So do you want to elaborate on?
I'm sorry. Is it him, or do you want me to elaborate a little bit?
No, yeah, it's still your opening statement, dude.
All right, perfect. So basically, you heard that statement where he's saying women don't have enforcement mechanism for the rights, and women's rights are inherently given it to them by men, right? So what's confusing about that statement is we're talking about a couple different things here, and this is where I want to clarify, and I'm gonna actually pass it on to him when he's ready to make his opening statements. But what type of rights are we talking about here, right? Are we talking about human rights? Are we talking about natural rights? And it seemed like when he was going into the debates, he was kind of like conflating the both of it, right? Where it's somehow in some arguments he will refer to natural rights, and then other arguments he will refer to the human rights argument of things, whether it's like, or God, or at least that's what it seemed like he was hinting. So I want to go ahead and get into a little bit more detail, but I think this is it for my opening statement, and we can get cracking.
Okay, cool. Andrew?
Yeah, so that really didn't tell me much, and he didn't really make an argument, but let me kind of go through this.
Your audio just cut out. It got really quiet. Your mic just...
Sorry about that. Is that?
It's good. It's good now.
So I did take the time to review my opponent's material. Usually my opponents don't actually review mine. I don't know why this is, but people don't seem to take debates very seriously. They just kind of operate off of pure emotion, and they don't even understand argumentation or structures for arguments. I did go through and take a look at his video where he kind of briefly addressed this, and I was less than impressed. In his video about just for pearly things being exposed, before he got to the section where he was obviously confused about my arguments, he claimed at the 29:46 minute mark that the last draft we had was in World War II. This was after pulling the date live, and the date saying 1973, which would be the Vietnam War, not World War II. But I thought that was kind of funny. And then in hour 14, in the same video, he restates my position that women's rights come from men. And then after a giggle, he actually had no argument and then went into some odd ramble, which was totally unintelligible. He starts by claiming we live in a structured government based around the Constitution, which is a non sequitur, and it doesn't even address my position or my argument. He then goes on to say hilariously that ever since the women got the right to vote, men can't collectively take those rights away. Obviously, this is absurd and it's self-defeating because who did they get the right to vote from in the first place? He then goes on to say that I brought up make-believe examples to make my point. And now that he's right about, these scenarios are called hypotheticals, and they're designed to be make-believe examples to test your logic. He then says historically societies were moving towards egalitarianism, which is also laughable. He then finishes by claiming only Eastern cultures oppress women in their framework, which is, again, hilarious because it actually proves my point. As far as kind of what he said in his opening statement, he, again, didn't really give me very much. He just said that from my perspective, he's asking if it's a physical perspective, which relies on enforcement. The answer to that would be yes. He then brings up a category of rights, which I guess we can get into, but I probably reject his framework of what rights are. And then, kind of past that, if he's asking, who has rights, I don't think that we have rights. I don't even think that there's a such thing as rights, at least not unalienable rights, meaning rights that can't be taken away from you. So that's kind of it for my opening statement. I probably would have had more to say, but I haven't actually heard an argument or anything from him. So we can kind of move on from there.
Cool. All right, we're going to get to the open part. So here's the part where you guys just have back and forth and kick it off.
All right, so this guy's saying he didn't hear an argument, although we just posed one. So I guess you're trying to be nonchalant about this, which is cute. Okay, so you're used to, speaking the way. I mean, in fact, you're already saying I'm emotional and make people making emotional arguments, and then you're basing it off a video that, firstly, was just off statement about you, and second of all, realistically, didn't even have a whole fully fledged out explanation for it, because that's not what the show was about. It was just briefly mentioning it, but we're gonna do that on this podcast. So my first question to you is, when you talk about rights being able to be taken away or being enforced by men, what type of rights are you talking about? Are you talking about natural rights, or are you talking about human rights?
What do you think the distinction between the two are?
I'm asking you.
Well, are these physical? So I don't, any right that you would consider to be something which is physical from a secular framework, I would consider those to be right. Whether you call them natural rights or you call them whatever you want, it doesn't matter from my perspective.
Okay, but what I'm saying, what do you consider rights, right, that can be enforced and that can also be taken away if men collectivize?
Well, so I would make the distinction in two ways. The first would be an unalienable right. So if you look at the framing around our Constitution, there's only 3 unalienable rights. So the unalienable right would be a right which cannot be taken away under any circumstances. So the 3 unalienable rights would be the right to liberty, the pursuit of happiness, and what's the other one? It's life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So those would be unalienable rights. So everything else would be a negative right in the Constitution, or the way that we at least perceive rights. So none of them are positive rights. They're all affirmed in the negative, meaning you can't do X. It's not a positive of what you must do or should do as a right, but rather it's a restriction on what you can't do, that type of thing.
So what would you say then? Where would you say your definition of your rights? Where do you believe that comes from?
I don't think we have rights.
You just got done explaining inalienable rights, right? The ones we're talking about enforcing and being able to be taken away. Where does that come from?
These are conceptualizations, though. Right? I'm
But
just giving you conceptualizations, not what I believe.
We actually have laws that
just stop. Hang on.
Don't tell me to stop.
I need you to understand. Well, I need you to understand my position before you ask the question, because I'm answering the question. So what I'm giving you is a conceptualization of what an unalienable right is. Doesn't mean I believe they exist. It just means that I'm telling you what they are. And then I'm telling you what a negative right is. I'm not saying that those things actually exist. They're all social constructions from my perspective. They're socially constructed. They don't actually exist in physical reality. They're made the fuck up.
If they don't exist in physical reality, how can people enforce it?
They're enforcing a social construction. So the person exists in physical reality. The other person exists in physical reality. But whatever the conceptualization is of what you want to enforce does not exist as some physical metric. So you can't, like, for instance, I can't point out a right. I can't point to it or taste it or smell it or touch it or any of those things. They don't actually exist outside of your own brain. They're just conceptualizations of things.
I'm so all right. So you're saying rights don't exist outside of your own brain, but yet in the physical world where rights are actually important, and in your argument, actually in the previous argument that you mentioned, can be enforced. And also, if men in your hypothetical world were to collectivize can be taken away, you're also making the same argument that those rights just exist in people's heads and there's no real world consequences towards that.
There's no performative contradiction between the two. So if you have a conceptualization that something is a right, you conceptualize that this is true, even if it's not.
How about we don't conceptualize it? Let's just look at the rights right now.
Because it's a concept. It's a concept.
Constitution in your last example, right? We're talking about inalienable rights. Let's talk about that. Because
if you don't want me to conceptualize it,
it's a legal document that exists. So it's not something that is in your head. It's actually written down, and we've been following those laws,
bro. If you don't want me to conceptualize,
how long?
Okay, if you don't want me to conceptualize it, then point to where one is. Point to a right.
Okay.
What does a right smell? What does a right smell like?
Amendment.
What does the Second Amendment smell? What does the Second Amendment smell like? What does it look like? What does it taste like? What you can't point to it. It's just a conceptualization of a thing,
no, you
right?
Can point to it. There's a
well, then point to it.
Printed thousands of times that basically says, "Hey, this is what your rights are." And guess what? There's enforcement mechanisms put in place to enforce that document. So you're saying that's just a concept to you?
The piece of paper is real. You would agree. I would agree with you. The piece of paper and the ink and everything else, those are all physical things. But the rights, which are enshrined on that piece of paper, those are conceptualizations. They don't exist. You understand that? They don't actually exist. A right doesn't actually exist. If it does, show me where it is. It's just a social construction. They're made up. They're made the fuck up, dude. Made up.
So here's the thing, because you're this is where you're going with this, and it's actually kind of interesting that you're taking this route, right? Because I understand where you're coming from. You're saying it's something that we conjure up. It's a concept, all right? It's one of those things where it comes from our minds. We put it out there, but at the end of the day, it's just a concept. You can't point to a right. You can't point to a thing. But again, these are the same things that have very real world consequences, whether it's human rights or whether it's natural rights. These are very things that affect people in the real world. Societies build structures and systems around these certain rights, all right, especially the ones that you consider inalienable, even the same one you used as an argument when you talk about enforcement mechanisms being the men, all right? So how can men enforce something that doesn't exist? How can they point to something and say, all right, well, that does, like, you understand how you're taking it from your conceptualized world and it doesn't make sense in reality. You understand that, right? There's two different things. So I'm talking about reality here, rights, not concepts.
Yeah,
so
but hang on. But in reality, they're in reality, they're just concepts. You can afford societies and structure societies based around concepts. We do it all the time. Social constructions, especially. For instance, take a school. A school isn't anything other than a building where people go to learn. What makes it a school? What makes it a school is that we call it a school. Right? Yeah. Well, no, that's not what makes it a school. A school is still a school, even if there's no people in it.
The structures of the school, right?
Right. So
you have the teachers, you have the janitorial staffs, you even have the students to make it all work. So at the end of the day, this empty building, for instance, can be repurposed to anything else.
Let me finish.
At the end of the day, time out. At the end of the day, it's the people that make it up, right? They build the institution and the system that turns it into a school. The exact same people that build up the system, all right, from a fictional conceptual document that you want to call the Constitution, and as long as those people abide by those document, it becomes real. So in your other argument,
no, it's not real.
Okay.
So backing up,
back to concepts again.
Well, that's all school is it's a conceptualization of a thing that we call a learning center.
Education is just a concept.
Let me finish a sentence, dude. I let you talk and express whatever you wanted. Let me at least respond before you cut in. So try to understand that what you're talking about is a conceptualization which is applied. Morals operate this way. Almost everything in your life operates around social constructions for normalcy. A stop sign's a social construct, right? There's a physical sign there, but the fact you're supposed to stop there is socially constructed. It's made up. It's not actual reality that you must stop at a stop sign. You just do because you operate as though it's reality. So when you're saying, hey, let me finish, man. So when you're saying, hey, these things are applied to reality, they map onto reality, I agree with you. That's how we talk about concepts. So I'm willing to engage with the concepts being applied to reality, but you need to first start with these are just concepts and they don't actually exist physically anywhere.
No, I can't start with that premise because that doesn't make any sense. Though to me, from everyone else's standpoint, even you're using an example of the stop sign. Okay, yeah, I get it. What does anything really actually mean, right? Unless there were certain laws assigned or governed to it, just like anything else. So the stop sign, it's a pact that we sign with the laws of the society we're currently living in that said, hey, if you see a stop sign, you stop, because if you don't, well, guess what? You're more likely to cause physical harm to other people that exist. So it becomes a real thing.
It's
so
still a concept. It's conceptual.
Okay, listen, I understand the concept you're talking about, but when you bring it to reality, they have real world consequences. So we can't be arguing, okay, well, it's a stop sign, it's a law, it can mean anything or it cannot mean anything. It doesn't, you can't really point to it, but at the end of the day, they still affect people in a very real way, real, tangible, and practically effective.
Yeah, but so what? So saying that a conceptualization can map on reality based on you behaving as though it's real, I've already conceded must be true. It's the only logical way that can be true.
So it is true.
Are you listening to what I'm saying?
Yeah, I just heard what you just said.
So then you have to start with the presupposition that these are concepts, which you just categorically rejected. So you need to say these are just concepts. Concepts. They're not real. These aren't real.
But they have real world consequences. That's what you're not understanding. You're bringing it back to concepts.
No, something that doesn't exist has no real world consequence.
It's a real enough document that it's governing a whole country and in relations to other countries that it's real enough. It's no longer a concept. You don't need to conceptualize the concept.
No, it's still a concept.
It's there. You don't even need to, even when it comes
down you still need to conceptualize it. You still have to conceptualize the rights.
Explain.
Well, because they don't exist in physical reality, dude. What are you not getting about this? None of these conceptualizations.
Do you believe that even before the concept of good and evil or right or wrong, do you believe that people just didn't know the difference?
What that's a total non sequitur. What does that have to do with anything?
No. I'm getting to a point though. Because
what's the point?
The point is, no matter what, even if it's in your head, you're talking about what's the concept of right, what's the concept of wrong. Realistically, we all know there's a natural a law that lets us know that there's something good and there's something bad. The natural law of justice and injustice, moral or immoral or unmoral, whatever the fuck you want to call it, right? So those things are something that you would classify around human law, human what do you call it? Human nature or human rights, right? Because we all kind of know that stuff already to begin with. So you can call that a concept, you can call it whatever it is, but even though you want to categorize that as concepts, they still have real world consequences to how human govern. So for instance, someone who wakes up isn't going to just go murder their parents because they know that's bad. Now, are you going to say there are people that do that in the real world? No, there are people that do that, but the vast majority of people understand the morals. So even if they're concepts, which I don't deny, they are concepts, they have real world consequences. And I'm talking about the real world where you're trying to bring it back to the concepts.
So again, you can act in such a way as though a thing which you conceptualize is real, and that will create consequences. But the consequences are coming from the things in physical reality, in this case, human beings acting on those conceptualizations, the conceptualizations of rights, the conceptualization that that's a school, the conceptualization this is private property. All of these things are conceptualized, but they don't exist in tangible physical reality. So what you're really talking about is human behavior. And I agree that human behavior has direct impacts on other human beings based on however you conceptualize why they're behaving that way, what they're behaving that way for, what they're going to do in the future, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We all operate under, I think the conceptualizations are necessary and social constructions are necessary for us to live. But that doesn't mean that they exist in reality. So when we're talking about rights, try to understand my position here, which what I'm trying to flesh out is that rights themselves don't exist. Acting as though that they do, I think we can do. And sure, that gives us some impact because of human behavior, but rights themselves don't even exist. They just don't exist. So we're talking in abstracts here. When you say, can you take these rights? When you say, can you take these rights away from these people? It's like, I don't know that they have rights to begin with, especially not unalienable rights, meaning they can't be taken away. That seems paradoxical to me.
Can you roll that clip again, Alex, real quick?
Sure. I think you guys are also kind of going about semantics. You guys largely agree. Yes.
No,
right?
that's what I'm saying. Because like
semantics are important.
Hang on. Stop. Let me just clear this up. So you guys both agree that rights aren't something tangible you can see, but they both have real world consequence. I think you guys can move on to the next part because at this point, this is like we're just semantics. But yeah, I can place the clip.
Women can't make decisions about their own rights because they can't enforce their own rights. So since they have no enforcement mechanism other than men, all their rights come from men, so they can't actually be equal. There's always going to be a differential, and that's a necessary biological truth. It's not saying that women can't be equal in the eyes of men as far as, you can't murder them, abuse them, things like this within the commons that you would do with men. But there can't actually be egalitarianism. It's not even possible because women have no enforcement mechanism. So since there's no enforcement mechanism, there's just it's a laughably absurd idea.
Women have no enforcement mechanism.
Okay, so again, there's you on tape. We're not even talking about concepts. We're talking about reality.
We were talking about concepts.
No, you weren't talking about concepts. You were talking about reality because
we're talking about how people
enforcement is a reality. It's a physical, tangible thing, right? So when you're sitting there saying that women don't have enforcement mechanism for their rights, you are then conceding that it's a physical thing. So moving forward from that, because we both now understand that rights have physical.
No, we can't move forward from that because you're wrong.
Well, because now you're gonna drag it back. I'm trying to move forward from this.
I can't move forward until I get a concession out of you.
So where the rights
get a
come
concession.
From? Where the rights?
They don't come from anywhere. They don't exist. They don't exist external of your brain.
So you see the position he's taking on now versus the position he took on last time.
The position I had with her, with
wasn't the same one. It wasn't the same one. I watched the whole thing, buddy. And no, you guys were arguing a physical, tangible thing. We weren't arguing concepts. Now the whole conversation has changed the concept. So now that I ask you,
I don't. Maybe you just don't get it.
Even
I don't know.
Question.
Do you just not understand? Like even when I was debating,
you understand. I really don't think you get it at all.
Well, why don't you give me? Why don't you give me? Why don't you give me a second, and I'll try to re-explain it to you.
Take as much time as you need.
So starting with the FARA debate, just because I can entertain your ideas, and I told her specifically in that debate, I don't view rights the same way that you do, but I can do what's called an internal critique. So if you assume that these things are real and you apply them in life, I can internally critique your position to even see if it makes sense. That's the point of a debate, is an internal critique, which is exactly what I did with Farah. I explained to her and expressed to her, I don't see rights the same way that you do. I'm not even sure that we have rights. Not even sure about that, right? I could be persuaded if somebody gave me a good enough position that we did, but just like I told her, I'm not even sure that we do. But I can internally critique your position where you say, I think that we do, and here's where I think that our rights come from. Here's why I think that they need to be enforced. Just going into somebody's worldview and arguing with them based on what they consider a thing X to be, whether it's a unicorn, a leprechaun, rights, whatever the fuck it is, you can entertain their ideas without believing in them, even if you take the opposite position, man. I don't know why that's complex for you.
The opposite could be true in the same sense as me, because I don't need to go into your world to believe it's just a concept and then just argue from there. So do you see how the opposite could be true at the same time?
No.
So why don't we just come to a middle ground? If we're going to talk about the realities or the real worlds, no need to go back and forth with what your idea of rights are, what the idea of rights are. Let's talk about what everyone generally understands as rights, and then move on from there. So it doesn't. Yeah,
but that would be granting.
It doesn't have to be your definition of what you think rights is. All right, but generally the rights. So for instance, right, when we talk about voting. Okay, now we talk about what is the hot topic right now? Abortion. All right, that's a thing, right? So women abortion rights, that's one thing they will consider that, right? So both Republican women and men voted to remove female rights to abortion in certain states. So that's a physical, tangible thing that actually has real world consequences, because that's a situation. In your last argument, you're saying that women don't have rights because men, or because women don't have the enforcement mechanism. But my disagreement is, no, women do have the enforcement mechanism. Since we're not going to go into your definition of rights, what I define rights are pretty much given by governments. Not given by governments, but it's kind of like protected and enforced by governments, which is the system or whatever society that you're living in, right? You sign a pact, they say, okay, you give up some of your rights, you give up some of your authority to us, and then in return, you get to live your life however, pursuit of happiness, live free, do whatever, as long as you abide by these rules. That's the part of your authority you give up, right? So if you sign that pact with the government or whatever society you decide to live in, all right, they also enforce those rights for you and make sure that that doesn't get taken away. So essentially, people who participate in these systems are both women and men. So realistically, I would agree with you if you want to talk about the enforcement mechanism at the end of the day, overwhelmingly becoming men, like in law enforcement, military, or whatever you want to add, throw that into. Yeah, but to argue it and say that women lack the enforcement mechanism to be able to enforce their rights is just wildly absurd.
So what's so I kind of trying to piece this together so I make sure I get this correct.
Retarded, bro. What the fuck? I don't think you get it. I really don't.
I don't. Well, you're right. I don't even understand what you just said. So can you give me a more concise version?
Your head.
Yeah, give me a more.
Go back in La La Land. That's what you got to do. Go back into concepts.
Can you give me a concise version of what your argument is as to why you think that it's not a paradox that there's egalitarianism if men are affording the rights to women?
How is that a paradox if men are affording the rights to women?
Well, because the word is egalitarianism. You know what that means, right?
I never used the word egalitarianism.
Well, then you're strawmanning my argument, because my argument is about egalitarianism, not rights. Equality.
I'm not strawmanning your argument.
So here you are, because it's about egalitarianism. Men and women can't ever be equal. It's not fucking possible. It's paradoxical to say that the people you have to go to demand to ask them to benevolently bequeath unto you rights, that you're equal with those people. That's a paradox.
Well, then we have to define what those rights are, right?
Well, who cares what you define them as? It doesn't matter what you.
Okay,
it wouldn't matter if it's a right to a Snicker bar. So, what are you talking about?
So the rights that we have right now, right? That women have, same as men. All right. So that also gets enforced. You're not going to impede on a woman's right to pursue happiness or liberty or whatever it is that she wants. You're not going to impede on a woman's rights to do any of that bullshit. So there is an enforcement mechanism there. And there are certain things that are listed that are there. So to say that it's something that is given to us by men, it's not, because we're operating under natural law now. You understand that, right?
Are we operating under natural law, or are we operating under constitutional law?
Constitutional law is natural law.
What makes it natural?
What are you talking about?
What makes it natural?
Natural rights that come out of it.
What makes these rights natural? What makes them natural? What makes them natural?
That you sign a pact with the state or whatever society you're living with.
Why is that natural?
Why is it not?
Well, I mean, you're begging the question at that point. So I asked you the question.
Are you trying to conflate that with human law?
Well, no, you conflated
human law. So I said, you can give it up to God. You can say God, because as long as you exist as a human by nature, you can, as long as people don't try to kill you or anything like that, and in justice or injustice, typical things like that, then you're fine. That's
well, what rights do you think God gives you then?
Whatever people believe in religion.
So
it depends on what religion, and most of the stuff comes from Eastern religions, anyways. Like ancient Judaism, like Roman societies, Greek societies. They all had that style.
Okay, so when you're talking about constitutional law, you're saying that constitutional law is an extension of natural law. And what do you consider natural law to be?
Well, it's not an extension of natural law. It's an extension of natural rights.
Okay, what do you consider natural rights to be? Where are they coming from?
Given and protected under a government or whatever civilization you're living in.
So it's these are
So whatever laws that are governing. So whatever laws, so you can't kill people, you can't steal from people, stuff like that.
Got
you
it.
Get locked up for.
So your rights, right? So your rights ultimately are coming from people.
Yeah, just like the same people that make up the schools. And
so if we're going to delineate, got it. So if we're going to make a delineation as to which group of this people's makeup are the ones who are the enforcers of these rights, which people have made up, which person group would you say out of the two sexes are the most responsible for that enforcement mechanism?
Those who are allowed to vote and participate in the government system.
Well, not every country you can vote, right?
Well, yeah, okay. So, what country are we specifically talking about?
Well, who cares? It doesn't matter. Just as far as a conceptualization. Okay, so
we'll talk about the United States. This is a country I know. I'm not familiar with other countries. So let's talk about.
So women got the vote in 1919, right?
Doesn't mean they weren't influential.
Well, who gave it to them? Who gave him the vote?
Oh, he was what do you call it? Men.
Yeah, men gave him the vote. So thing
who made up the government? Who made up majority of the government? Men. Okay, perfect.
Who makes up the majority of the government now?
Still men.
Yeah. So it's always men.
The crux of the argument is, listen, I agree. I already agree with you that men can act as the enforcement mechanism, right? But what I don't disagree is.
So then you have a paradox.
What are you talking about?
So if women can't enforce their rights and they have to get their rights from men have to grant them their rights because they're the enforcers, then it's paradoxical to say they're equal.
If you want to talk about it comes from a system of participation. So if you're talking about before women getting the ability to vote and things like that, then fine, you have a point and I'll concede that to you. But if you're talking about after women got the right to vote, they participate in the electoral process, whether it's local, state, federal, it doesn't matter. So whatever they choose to vote for, whatever is their self-interest, they essentially have an enforcement mechanism, which is the power to vote. So if we're talking about in today's time, then yes, women do have an enforcement mechanism to be able to impact their will. That's it.
So let's say a woman votes that she wants to be able to have abortions, that women kind of collectively come around and they vote that in. And let's just say, for the sake of this argument, you're in, like, let's say Afghanistan or something. But even here in the United States, it would apply. Let's say that men said, yeah, you voted for that, but we're still not going to let you have abortions. Do you think women could still have abortions?
That goes against the legal process.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. Do you think that women would still be able to have abortions if men said you can't have any more?
If we're arguing in the United States, then if the women vote and all of a sudden people just want to overthrow it and the men collectivize and say that wouldn't work.
Why wouldn't it work?
Because the way the system is set up.
The system is set up at the whims of men.
What?
The system is set up at the whims of men. If men decide if the men decide collectively that the system is no longer applicable, it's no longer applicable.
Well, that doesn't happen though.
It does happen. It not only does it, not only no, it's happened twice here. It's happened twice in the United States.
What country we're talking about?
I'm talking about the United States. Talking about the United States.
Okay,
it's happened twice in the United States.
Group of men collectivizing to try to take over the government, it's damn near impossible.
No, it's happened twice. It's actually almost happened 4 different times. But the first time it happened, the first time was 1776. You know what happened then? Then the second time was during the Civil War. And in that point, they were extremely successful. They formulated their own government, an entire Southern government, and made their own new Charter of Rights and completely rejected the rights of the North.
Right, but you're still talking about when the country was in its infancy and it was still developing. You're always going to have those civil unrest.
The late 1800s was not infancy.
Listen, what you're describing happens to multiple different.
The late 1800s was not infancy.
But if we're here's the thing. If we're gonna, but what you're explaining is what happens to countries at their early stages. There's usually a split off from their original colonial masters or colonial superiority, and then there's some kind of civil war fostered. Yes, that's always. Listen, that's always the case.
So yeah, but so what?
Look at African countries right now.
What?
Hang on. Well, so what? It just
so what?
goes back on your point that you're making. And you don't
no, it doesn't.
Yes,
how?
It does.
Well, tell me that part.
The point I'm making is this stuff happens when countries are in their infancy. So you're gonna have those early stages of destabilization. But over time, as a country forms their laws and they forms and they're strengthening.
So what?
So what is there safeguards put in place to prevent against that? Why do you think all those 2 times that shit didn't happen anymore?
And if men decide that those safeguards aren't there anymore, they won't be there.
Well, then, but here's the thing. The only difference is those same men have a huge wall of bureaucracy they have to fight through to even make that happen.
No,
it doesn't take them just collecting a bunch of guns. It doesn't take a brute strength to walk up into the government and say, well, I'm going to take it over because, we're sick and tired of the system.
They've done it. It's been done globally more times than you can count.
17, whatever, bro.
No, that's recent. That's the Shah of Iran. What are you talking about? The Shah of Iran. The Shah of Iran, Afghanistan.
Iran right now, or are we talking about the United States?
Even, well, what I'm saying is that if this can happen, Duke, if this can happen there, why couldn't it happen here?
Because we're well established.
They were more well established.
Do you know how destabilized
the United States is? One of the youngest nations on planet Earth, sir. One of the youngest nations.
Exactly my point. What I was saying earlier, this bullshit only happens to young nations in their infancy.
This is one of the youngest nations on planet Earth.
It's difficult for men to do that. So we're going back to the West. The idea of the West, a bunch of dudes who are all of a sudden sick and tired of, the way the government's running, and they take up arms to overthrow it. It's not going to happen because the government's way too established. So when you're making my point, it's only in younger countries when they're highly influenced and in their infancy that insurrections and you have the changing of guard and civil wars that happen. But when we get into established nations, there's safeguards put in place because they learned from their lessons when they were in their infancy. That's how they work. So what you might have a case back in the day, but in today, you're wrong. Women do have an enforcement mechanism. It's called the federal government.
You mean men?
Which is largely men and women. So it's not solely men.
Well, no, it's mostly men who are the enforcers, though. So politicians don't.
Now you got women in the police forces,
politicians,
in the military.
Politicians don't enforce laws, right?
They create. Well, no. Time out. Okay. One branch create laws, the other one judges it, and the executive one sort of.
So all non sequiturs I don't care about. Who enforces the laws?
Non sequiturs. Jesus fucking Christ.
Yeah, they're not addressing my argument, which is who you can say who makes the laws, and I would agree with you who makes laws, but who enforces the laws?
The government.
Yeah, but
that's holding. When you sign a contract with when you sign a contract with the state, aka your citizenship, you're basically going into a societal agreement. All right, you agree to give up a certain amount of your rights, and in exchange for that, we will protect whatever is left of yours. All right, so that's the whole thing. So if anyone, meaning any other human being, all right, that breaks the laws, meaning they accost you in some kind of way, where they steal from you, or they try to kill you or your family members, all right, your rights will be enforced by the state because that's the contract you signed. So they act as the enforcer. Now, if you want to get into the weeds of who are the people actually going in and arresting these people or doing the investigations, yeah, you can have a say and say, yeah, the majority of them are men, right? Because they make up the police forces and they make up the military and things like that. But doesn't negate the fact that there are women in these positions too. Not only that, there are women that serve atop of those hierarchies that enable the enforcement of the rights of other people.
So we've established then that men are largely the enforcement arm of rights and laws that politicians
they're
pass.
Largely, but not solely.
I didn't say they're solely. I just said
in the last argument, it kind of seemed like you were hinting at that because you didn't say it.
So largely they are.
Be specific.
Largely they are, right? You agree with that? So if that's true,
I agree with that 100%.
So if those men,
it's a no-brainer. Largely they are.
So if those men decide that they're going to stop enforcing those laws by the government, if they just decide to do that, let's say they go on strike or something like this,
which department?
Or the police force,
the Army, Navy, police.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't even matter. Like, let's just take a look at the riots that happened, the BLM riots that happened. If police forces are told to stand down, right? There's nobody around to enforce your rights. Who's there to enforce your rights when someone's throwing a brick through your window? Who's there to enforce your rights when neighborhoods are getting burned down? Who's there to do that if people decide not to enforce your rights for you?
Well, you know what actually happens in those cases? Especially in those cases where anarchy starts to form. All right.
Men with guns enforce their own.
Right. So you get people who come out with guns and they enforce it, right?
Yeah, men.
And those men can enforce it on behalf of what? To protect
themselves.
Their families, right?
Yeah.
And those families usually include moms, daughters, sisters, aunties, right? So one can argue that they're being influenced by that because they don't.
Who cares who they're influenced by? They're the enforcers, bro.
To be hurt, right? So there's a motivation to to enforce
Sure.
that right if the government fails. So either way, it's not still solely men. Even if men decide today that collectively we're going to go to war against women, hypothetically speaking, I mean, it's never going to happen. But if in that case, the reason why it'd be impossible, because there would be other men who would stand up and fight against that. By definition, and even biologically speaking,
so that's my
men
argument.
are the enforcement arm of women. So
then I'm right.
So we're exactly, that's the point. But in your argument, you were saying, you were making it seem like it was solely men. If men decide to collectivize and take the rights, it still doesn't.
It is solely men, because what you're saying is that men would have to be the ones who stopped other men from taking away women's rights. So it's solely men, bro.
By their women.
It's still solely men.
By their women.
Who they're influenced by doesn't matter.
It does kind of matter, because your reasoning for doing something kind of makes sense. You wouldn't just do something for nothing, now would you? You wouldn't just take up arms and defend what their motive,
bro. What their motivation is irrelevant. The fact is that all women's rights, all of women's rights are come from men, because men are the enforcers of the rights. You agree that that's true. You agree that when anarchy,
let me finish, Duke. Have enforcement mechanisms.
Duke,
that's
let
me
I
finish.
Let me finish.
Enforcement mechanism are men.
Let me finish my point.
And in modern societies, women as well.
Are you ready to let me finish my point? You tell me when I can finish my point. I just let you go on your whole diatribe, and I didn't even interrupt it. So just hang tight. You agree with me on these.
Dude, chill, bro.
You agree with me on these concepts. The conceptualization here is that men are the enforcers of rights. You agree that that's true. You agree that it would necessarily take men to stop other men from taking away women's rights. We also agree that that's true. So no matter which way you cut this, the rights of women come from men. And so therefore egalitarianism or true equality is impossible. It can't be done, because it's always just begging men for the rights. And you can say, but women can influence men to act as their safeguard for rights. That's true. They could do that. They could use sexuality or bribes or any number of different mechanisms to do that. But they're still utilizing men as the enforcement mechanism for their fucking rights. You can't get away from this. It's circular.
So, okay, but here you go again. All right. But it's not largely men, though. You got to understand that, because when we're talking about governments, it's a system, meaning there's men and women. So you would have that there's a wall of bureaucracy there that includes both men and women when we're talking about governmental societies, right? So there are women that play a part. Some of them, if they're higher up in the hierarchy, right, they play a higher role in the enforcement of certain rights, and they use men. So if you want to talk about using men as the strong arm, right? Yeah, you're right. But if we're talking about overall, women have a heavy influence in enforcing their rights.
Well, they have. You can say that women can influence men to enforce their rights for them, and I wouldn't disagree with you.
And
I think
still
that's
using it.
I think that's possible, but who are they relying on? They're not relying on them. They're relying on men. So still, it's due to the benevolency of men that women have rights, and the opposite isn't true. The opposite's not true. So we don't need women to enforce our rights. That's the distinction, and that's why you can't have egalitarianism.
I disagree.
You disagree that we need women to enforce men's rights?
Yeah, because if you're voting, what do you think? 50% of women are the other half of the voting block. What are you talking about?
So again,
it's men and women that got abortion banned.
The vote is allowed
men
because
and women took away men and women due to certain beliefs work together to remove the rights of other women. The same thing can happen backwards. We don't just work in a system that requires brute strength of men. We work in a system that has working pieces that involve both men and women. And some of those women are in leadership positions, which have a bigger influence when it comes down to affecting other people's rights and influencing and enforcing their rights as well. So for you to, because it seems like you're making.
Who enforces their right to vote? Who enforces their right to vote? Who? Which sex enforces their right to vote, Duke?
The government.
Which sex enforces their right to vote?
Sex.
Overwhelmingly. Which one? Which one is it?
Both sex.
Both sex overwhelmingly are the enforcement arm, huh?
Well, if you're talking about sex, well, we're gonna talk about who majority is in the office, right? We'll say men.
No, the enforcement. Who's going to enforce the woman's right to vote?
Okay,
it's going to be men. It's going to be fucking men.
We're talking about the police force.
All of them. All enforcement arms. All.
We can agree that it's largely men in these positions and roles, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so then now we're getting to a conversation in terms of what men naturally gravitate to versus what women naturally gravitate to in terms of work, right? And that'd be based off of biology, because men biologically fill up these roles, right?
Yeah,
protector roles, right?
That's
versus
right.
Women
Yeah,
fill other roles that are support structures, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so be that being said, that it's basically people working together to make that happen. It's not.
Oh, sure. I think
like,
that men and
it's not like it's just the men, and that's just
I think that men and women have to cooperate. Of course we do. I think that that's in our best interest to do, but that really doesn't change the point, which is that you say, wait a second, Andrew, women can vote. And my argument to this is like, they can only vote based on the enforcement mechanism of men. Yeah. They can't enforce their own right to vote. They can only allow the enforcers to enforce their right to vote. And you just kind of agree with me in this circular loop over and over and over.
To the point that it's already done. But if we're talking about after the right to vote, if men try to take that away, they're going to run into a wall of bureaucracy that'll make it impossible for them to take away rights for women to vote. There's too many special interest groups that rely on the votes of women. The American corporation lives off the votes of the women.
And who runs most corporations?
Governmental policies.
Who runs most corporations?
They live in off the What?
Which sex are most of the lobbyists, and corporations largely are run by which sex?
A lot of women.
Largely by which sex? What's the biggest demographic of people
who head corporations?
Yeah, men or women
in leader. Well, time out now, because we got to figure it out, right? Are we talking which level position?
All levels.
Okay, now which type of corporation are we talking
Doesn't
about?
Doesn't matter. All corporations. All corporations.
We gotta be specific because we're talking about.
Why do we need to be specific? If you weren't specific on which type.
More educated in today's society, and they're filling up a lot of these C-suite corporate jobs that you're seeing out there, and a lot of these men aren't competing right now,
bro. At the top levels, the hierarchical institutions are run by men. All of them are run by men. The entire enforcement is men.
Do you see why I wanted to specify? I said which level. You said it didn't matter. Now you're going in specific. So that's why specifics are important when we have this conversation, because we're talking about top level. There's no doubt there's a lot of more male CEOs out there. Matter of fact, you want to talk about top levels of governments, there are more males.
So all these checks and balances for enforcement are men.
Different sections.
So all these top levels. So
you start to see a different statistic.
So all these things that you quoted as being differentials of power, which women could utilize to enforce their rights, are all run by fucking men. Largely run by men, almost overwhelmingly run by men at every single level. The enforcement arm of the police, the military, the corporations, everything is run by men.
What you're denying right now is the influence that these women embedded in these corporations, embedded in these governments have within. So much so that a lot of these men who are headed a lot of these top institutions are heavily influenced by the women, to the point where a lot of them they have special interest in voting for women, right? They have a lot of special interests vested in that. So
that's right.
You can't just look at that situation.
They have a lot.
But then you're looking at it purely from a physical and a job perspective.
Look, you're totally right. Look, there's nothing to even argue. You're totally right. There's lots and lots and tons and oodles. Hang on, let me finish. Let me finish, Duke.
But you're leaving out some parts that I have.
Let me finish, Duke.
I want to make sure we're not sitting here in the agreement of the same. Listen, because you're saying it's solely men. I'm saying no. So just keep it at that.
Okay, so Duke, what you're saying here is that if women go vote for their own rights, that all the checks, balances, everything, which is the enforcement arm, is run by men. I totally agree that women can influence men to protect their rights. I'm just disagreeing with you that women themselves can protect their own rights without men, and that men can protect their rights without women. We don't need them to protect our own rights, which is why when you take the Anarchy situation where you have like the Black Lives Matter riots, you say, look, when the police don't show up, what happens? Men grab guns and they begin to enforce their own rights. Women aren't doing that. They were not grabbing the fucking guns. They're not enforcing their own rights. They're not doing any of that because they can't. They can't protect themselves against men.
Enforcement.
What's that?
What do you consider enforcement of rights? What
threat of violence? Threat of violence is
the threat of violence.
Yeah,
so,
that's
okay,
enforcement.
Well, if we're arguing off of that, then yeah, you have a point because my thought of enforcement.
Well, what else could it be besides threat of violence? It can't be anything.
You don't have to locking somebody up and arresting them for violating somebody else's rights.
That's threat of violence. That's threat of violence.
That's the threat of just detaining someone.
That's wait, whoa. Hang on. What happens if you don't want to be detained?
Well, then you get arrested.
Well, how do they arrest you if you don't want to be arrested?
They put you in handcuffs.
They beat your fucking ass, right? And then put your
what? So okay.
You say I don't want to be arrested, officer. Fuck off. And you turn around to walk off. Are they going to tackle you? Are they going to use physical force in order to subdue you?
Yeah, so they're going to use physical force, but they're not going to beat your ass right off the bat because remember, but
that's threat of violence. That's violence.
That if police officers actually assaulted the people they're arresting, they are liable for that.
That's violence. That's violence. Do you understand that that's all violence? It's all threat of violence. If you don't want to be arrested, the only reason you turn yourself in is because you're told to.
It's threat of loss of freedom.
That's violence. If you hang on,
violence?
Because if you try to escape from prison, what happens?
They catch you.
How? Well, what if you don't want to be caught and you resist?
They physically restrain you, and if they only get violent. Are you trying to say they only get violent if that civilian gets violent?
No, right? What I'm saying is that the threat, the enforcement of all rights is the threat of violence. It has to be necessarily. Because if you don't,
listen, I have a different definition of that. The enforcement is the threat of loss of freedom. That's it. That's really. I'm not.
How can you have your freedom?
But like, here's the thing. The thing is, checks and balances are also, although it's not followed perfectly, there are checks and balances in place when you talk about law enforcement and how they engage with civilians, even civilians who don't, adhere to authority right away. There's still levels of engagement. Police forces teach this stuff all the time. They're not going to go straight to punching you and beating your ass. They're going to go through these different steps of engagement.
As long as you comply.
They get to that point, and for them to get to that point, they have to feel the threat of violence coming from the opposite person. So from your perspective, if the person is actually being physically violent, then yes, that force has every right to meet violence with violence. But
no, they don't have to be
someone. It's not usually violence. It's usually just the threat of loss of freedom. That's it. Loss of freedom and loss of the rights that you signed with the government when you were born or when you immigrated to the country.
Hang on, relax. You can't sign an agreement when you're born, by the way. But that aside,
it's called a social security number.
That's not signing an agreement. But that aside, as you walk out, if you're in prison, you've been imprisoned, okay, and you just say, "Fuck this! I don't want to be here anymore. I don't like this whole being imprisoned thing." And the gate opens one day for no particularly good reason, and you just walk out. You're not using any violence at all, and police officers come out to collect you. And you say, I'm not going to use any violence, but I'm going to keep walking this direction no matter what, right? Will they use physical force to restrain you and drag your ass back to prison?
Yeah.
That's violence.
That's physical force.
It's violence.
They won't.
What is violence then?
They classify it as restrainment. That's a legal term.
Yeah, but it's still violence. It's always threat of violence. They're using violence to stop you from doing X thing you want to do.
Straight punching you or beating you or shooting you.
That's not violence.
In some cases, yes, but they use restraint. They have their own level. They have literally, they're like, what is it, like 5 steps in like these police departments of threats before they get to the point where they're using violence.
Duke.
So so if you're using law enforcement,
if you grab a person's arm and they don't want their arm grabbed, are you being violent with them?
No. It's a form of restraint. I think punching somebody is a form of violence.
So if somebody was strong enough to hold you in place physically and stop you from moving, you don't think that that's violent?
It depends on how.
They're just holding you and you can't move.
That's restraint.
Yeah, so that's not violence in your mind. So if somebody who's super strong, so if you went
violence, where it turns to violence is while they're restraining that individual, they're punching them. They're committing some kind of
so hang on. So if a 5 foot, let's say you were dating a 4'9" woman, okay, and she was 96 pounds. And you went over to her and said, "You ain't leaving, bitch." And you grabbed her. You didn't hurt her, but you grabbed her and you held her in place and said, "You can't fucking move from this spot until I say so." And you wouldn't let her go. You're saying that that's not violence?
Legally, they call that a tort.
Is it violence, though?
It's technically just a 1 step below battery.
So is it violence?
What are we talking about? Are we talking about your definition or legal definition?
Your definition. Is that
No,
violence?
I'm talking about the legal definition. It's a
well,
tort.
what is your
Misdemeanor tort.
You don't think that's do you think that's violence or not, Duke?
I think it's restraint.
Do you think that so you don't would you say then the answer is no, Andrew, you're not being violent with this woman?
Physically restraining someone is not being violent.
So then just say no. Just say no, that's not violence.
You can classify that as assault. I would go with you on that definition, but saying it's violence, that starts to lead a slippery slope, because anyone who says, "Oh, well, I didn't like the way that guy grabbed my arm," that's also all of a sudden considered violence. That's
so that's not so then if you grab a 4'9" woman and you're not hurting her, but you won't allow her to move, and she wants to move and she wants to leave, and you won't let her, and you're holding her in place. I need you to tell me. I need you to hang on, Duke. I just need you to say, Andrew, that's not violence.
No, that's not violence. It's restraint.
Okay. Well, then there's nothing more I can say to that.
All right,
I bet those glasses make you see better.